Commander Xyloth pressed his three-fingered hand against the cool metal of the observation window. His eyes, large and dark like polished stones, watched the human approach through the corridor. The security feeds showed the same impossible sight from multiple angles. The human had been shot. Not once, but 7 times. 7 plasma bolts that should have turned any living creature into vapor. Yet here he was, walking toward the bridge with that strange expression on his face. The humans called it a smile. "Sir, should we seal the blast doors?" Lieutenant Kresh asked, her voice tight with fear. Her scales had turned pale green, the color of terror among their species. Xyloth could not answer. He had studied humans for 3 cycles now, ever since they had made first contact with the Galactic Council. He had read the reports, watched the videos, attended the briefings. None of it had prepared him for this moment. The human was supposed to be their prisoner. They had captured his small research vessel 2 days ago, a routine piracy operation in the Outer Rim. The ship had been alone, undefended, an easy target. Or so they thought. The human's name was Daniel Chen, according to his identification papers. He was a xenobiologist, traveling alone to study rock formations on an uninhabited moon. Nothing about him suggested he was military. His files showed no combat training, no weapons expertise, nothing that would explain what they were witnessing now. He wore simple, civilian clothes, now torn and burned from the plasma fire. Blood stained his shirt, but he moved as if he had simply stumbled and scraped his knee. "The doors will not hold him," Xyloth said quietly. He had seen enough. This human was different. Or perhaps all humans were like this, and the briefings had failed to convey the truth. "Stand down, all weapons, stand down." "Commander?" Kresh turned to face him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You saw what happened in the cargo bay. You saw what happened in the engine room. Weapons do not stop him. They only make him angrier." Xyloth moved away from the window. His heart beat rapidly in his chest. A drum of fear he tried to hide from his crew. He had been a pirate commander for 20 years. He had raided hundreds of ships, fought dozens of species, and never once had he felt this particular emotion. It was not just fear. It was the understanding that he had made a terrible mistake. The human had been cooperative at first. When they boarded his ship, Daniel had raised his hands in surrender. He had followed their instructions, allowed them to bind his wrists, and walked peacefully to their holding cell. They had planned to ransom him back to the human government. Humans paid well for their citizens, or so the rumors said. It should have been simple, but then Kresh had decided to have some fun with the prisoner. Xyloth closed his eyes, remembering the moment everything changed. Kresh had entered the holding cell with 2 guards. She had wanted to scare the human, to show him who was in charge. She had struck him across the face. The human had fallen to the floor, and Kresh had laughed. The guards had laughed too. And then Daniel had looked up at them. His lip was bleeding, and there was that smile again. Not a smile of happiness, but something else, something cold. "You should not have done that," Daniel had said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. He spoke perfect galactic standard, with barely an accent. "I was going to cooperate. I was going to wait for my government to pay. But now we have a problem." Kresh had laughed harder. She had pulled her plasma pistol and pointed it at his chest. "What problem, human? You are nothing. You are weak. You are prey." Daniel had stood up slowly. The restraints on his wrists were made of durasteel, capable of holding creatures 3 times stronger than the human baseline. But as Daniel pulled his arms apart, the metal began to groan. "The problem," he said, still smiling, "is that you woke something up in me, something we humans carry inside us. You would call it rage. We call it determination." The restraints had snapped. Kresh had fired her weapon immediately, the plasma bolt striking Daniel in the shoulder. The smell of burning flesh filled the cell. Daniel had stumbled back, looked down at the wound, and then laughed. It was not a laugh of pain or fear. It was a laugh of genuine amusement. "Is that the best you have?" he asked. Kresh had fired again, and again. Each shot hit its target. Each shot burned through clothing and flesh, and each shot failed to drop the human. Daniel had walked forward, step by step, until he stood directly in front of Kresh. He had taken the plasma pistol from her hand as easily as an adult taking a toy from a child. Then he had walked out of the cell, leaving Kresh collapsed on the floor, her body frozen in shock. That had been 2 hours ago. Since then, Daniel had moved through the ship like a force of nature. The crew had tried to stop him. They had shot him with every weapon they had, plasma rifles, shock batons, even a pulse cannon that they had mounted in the engine room. Nothing worked. The human bled, yes. He showed signs of pain, yes. But he did not stop. He did not slow down. He just kept walking toward the bridge, where Xyloth and the remaining crew waited. Now Xyloth could hear footsteps in the corridor outside. Heavy, steady, relentless. The door to the bridge was reinforced titanium, designed to withstand military-grade explosives. Xyloth had locked it as soon as Daniel escaped. He had hoped it would buy them time, time to call for help, time to negotiate, time to think. But as he watched the door begin to glow red at its center, he realized time had run out. "He is cutting through," Kresh whispered. She had recovered from her encounter in the cell, but her confidence was gone. "How is he cutting through? He has no tools." Xyloth saw it then. Through the small window in the door, he could see Daniel's hand pressed against the metal. Somehow, impossibly, the human's touch was heating the door. No, not heating it. The human was pushing so hard, with such force, that the friction alone was causing the metal to melt. It defied physics. It defied everything Xyloth knew about biology and material science. But it was happening. "What do we do?" another crew member asked. There were 12 of them on the bridge, all armed, all terrified. They had started as a crew of 40. Most had fled in escape pods as soon as they realized what was happening. The rest had tried to stop the human and failed. Xyloth made his decision. He walked to the command console and pressed the intercom button. "Daniel Chen, can you hear me?" The footsteps in the corridor stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then Daniel's voice came through the speaker, slightly distorted by the ship's old communication system. "I hear you, Commander. I surrender. We surrender. The crew will stand down. You may take control of the ship." Xyloth kept his voice steady, professional. He was a pirate, yes, but he was not suicidal. Whatever the human wanted, Xyloth would give it to him. Anything to end this nightmare. Another laugh echoed through the speaker. "You think this is about the ship? Commander, I do not want your ship. I do not want your cargo. I want something much simpler." "Name it." "I want you to understand. I want every pirate in this sector to understand. You made a choice when you boarded my vessel. You made another choice when your lieutenant struck me. Now I am making a choice. I am choosing to show you what happens when you threaten a human. We have a saying on Earth, Commander. It goes like this: you can knock us down, but we will always get back up. And when we do, we are not the same as before." The door exploded inward, torn from its frame by sheer force. Smoke filled the bridge as Daniel stepped through. His shirt was mostly gone now, burned away by plasma fire. His body was covered in wounds that would have killed any other species 3 times over. But he stood tall, his eyes bright with that terrible determination. Xyloth and his crew backed away, weapons forgotten on the floor. There was no point in fighting. They all knew it now. The human was unstoppable. Daniel walked to the center of the bridge and looked around, taking in the frightened faces, the abandoned weapons, the displays showing the ship's systems. He nodded, as if satisfied. "Good, you are learning. Now, Commander, you are going to do something for me. You are going to send a message to every pirate, smuggler, and raider in this sector. You are going to tell them what happened here today. You are going to tell them that humans are not prey. We are not victims. We are not easy targets. I will do as you say, Xyloth replied. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Daniel's smile faded, replaced by something harder, something that made Xyloth's blood turn cold. You will do more than that. You will tell them that if they see a human ship, they should run, because we do not forget and we do not forgive. We are patient and we are relentless, and if you hurt us, we will keep coming, always, no matter what. The human turned and walked toward the captain's chair. He sat down, wincing slightly as his injuries reminded him they existed. But even in pain, even bleeding, he radiated power. Now, contact the nearest human outpost. Tell them Daniel Chen is alive and requesting pickup. And then, Commander, you and your crew are going to wait here, very quietly, until they arrive. Xyloth nodded and moved to the communication console. His hands shook as he input the commands. Behind him, his crew remained frozen, unable to process what they had witnessed. They had been hunters, predators who saw the galaxy as their territory. In the span of 2 hours, a single human had taught them they were wrong. They were not the apex predators they believed themselves to be. As Xyloth sent the message, he thought about his future. Would he continue as a pirate after this? Could he? Every time he saw a ship, he would wonder if there was a human inside. Every time he considered boarding a vessel, he would remember this day. He would remember the sound of footsteps that never stopped, the smile that never wavered, and the terrible lesson he had learned. Humans were different. They felt pain like any other species, bled like any other species, could be wounded like any other species, but somewhere in their evolution, in their history, in their very DNA, they had developed something unique. The ability to ignore their body's warnings, the ability to push past limits that should be absolute, the ability to choose determination over survival instinct. Daniel Chen sat in the captain's chair and closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to rest. His breathing was labored, and blood continued to seep from his wounds. In an hour, human medical teams would arrive. They would be horrified by his injuries, amazed he had survived. They would treat him, heal him, and send him home. But the story of what happened on this ship would spread, passed from pirate to pirate, from crew to crew, across the entire outer rim. The galaxy had learned something important that day. Humans could be hurt. They could be wounded. They could bleed and scream and fall. But they could not be stopped. Not when they chose to keep going. Not when they decided that surrender was not an option. In that choice, in that moment of decision, humans became something more than flesh and blood. They became unstoppable forces, driven by will alone. Commander Xyloth finished sending the message and turned back to look at the human in his chair. Daniel's eyes were still closed, his chest rising and falling with each difficult breath. He looked vulnerable now, almost fragile, but Xyloth would never make the mistake of seeing weakness again. He had learned his lesson, the hard way. The bridge was silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems and Daniel's breathing. Outside, through the observation windows, stars drifted past in the endless black of space. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago, 2 hours ago, yesterday. But nothing was the same. The universe had shifted, and everyone on that bridge knew it. They had touched something primal, something fundamental about the human species, and it had burned them. Xyloth sat down at his own station, suddenly exhausted. His career was over. His crew was broken. His ship was forfeit. All because of one human, one scientist who should have been helpless. He wanted to hate Daniel, wanted to curse him, wanted to rage against the injustice of it all. But he could not. He could only feel a deep, profound respect mixed with his fear. Whatever else Daniel Chen was, he was a survivor, and that made him dangerous. The minutes ticked by in silence. No one spoke. No one moved unless necessary. They were all waiting, prisoners on their own ship, guarded by a wounded man who had somehow become their captor. It was absurd, impossible, and yet completely real. The universe had shown them something new, and they would carry that knowledge for the rest of their lives. When the human rescue ships finally arrived 3 hours later, they found Commander Xyloth and his crew sitting quietly on the bridge, weapons piled in the corner, hands visible and empty. They found Daniel Chen still in the captain's chair, unconscious now from blood loss, his body finally giving in to the trauma it had endured. The human medical team rushed to stabilize him, their scanners showing injuries that should have been fatal multiple times over. "How is he alive?" one of the medics asked, staring at the readings in disbelief. The other medic, older and more experienced, just shook her head. "He's human. That's how. Now stop asking questions and help me get him to the med bay." As they carried Daniel away on a stretcher, Xyloth watched through the observation window. The human's eyes fluttered open for just a moment, meeting Xyloth's gaze across the distance. That smile appeared again, weak but unmistakable. Then Daniel closed his eyes and let the medics take him away. Xyloth would never forget that smile. It would haunt him in the quiet moments, in the dark spaces between sleep and waking. It was not cruel or mocking. It was simply confident. The smile of someone who knew, beyond any doubt, that they had won. Not through strength or technology or numbers, but through pure, unbreakable will. The human authorities took custody of Xyloth and his crew without incident. There was no trial, no punishment as severe as what they had already endured. Instead, they were processed, documented, and released to tell their story. The humans wanted them to tell their story. It was a message, carefully calculated, delivered with precision. In the weeks that followed, Xyloth heard reports from across the sector. Piracy rates near human shipping lanes dropped by 70%. Raiders gave human vessels wide berth, preferring to seek easier prey. The story of Daniel Chen spread faster than any official communication, growing with each retelling, becoming legend even while the man himself recovered in a hospital bed on Earth. Xyloth retired from piracy and took a job on a cargo hauler, moving goods through safe, well-patrolled routes. He never forgot what happened on his ship. He never forgot the sound of those footsteps, the sight of that smile, the feeling of absolute helplessness in the face of human determination. He had learned a valuable lesson, though it cost him everything he had built. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest, not the smartest, not the most technologically advanced. But they had something unique, something that set them apart from every other species known to the Galactic Council. They had the ability to choose to keep going when every rational part of their brain screamed at them to stop. They could override their survival instinct with pure determination. That made them dangerous in ways that muscles and weapons never could. That made them unpredictable, unstoppable, and utterly terrifying when pushed too far. Xyloth understood now why the human government had been so adamant about peaceful relations. It was not because humans feared the other species. It was because they wanted to avoid showing the galaxy what they were truly capable of. But Xyloth had seen it. He had witnessed it firsthand, and he would never, ever forget the day he shot a human and watched him laugh and keep coming, unstoppable against all odds. The story became a warning, whispered in stations and bars throughout the Outer Rim. Do not attack human ships. Do not threaten human citizens. Do not assume that because they are alone, they are helpless. Because humans do not break the way other species break. They bend, they bleed, they suffer terrible wounds, but they do not stop. They cannot stop. It is not in their nature. Daniel Chen recovered fully from his injuries. The doctors marveled at his resilience, studied his case, and added it to the growing body of evidence about human physiological capabilities. He returned to his work as a xenobiologist, continuing his research on uninhabited moons and distant planets. But now, when he traveled, his ship was never alone for long. Human patrol vessels made sure of that, not because Daniel needed protection, but because the galaxy needed protection from what might happen if someone threatened him again. The incident was classified as a Category 1 human response event by the Galactic Council. It was studied, analyzed, and filed away in secure databases. Psychologists tried to explain it, biologists tried to understand it, military strategists tried to replicate it. But in the end, they all came to the same conclusion. Humans were unique not because of what they could do, but because of what they refused to accept. They refused to accept limits. They refused to accept defeat. They refused to acknowledge when they should be dead. And that refusal, that stubborn, illogical, beautiful refusal to give up, made them the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. Not because they wanted to be dangerous, but because they could not help being what they were. Years later, a young cadet in the Galactic Patrol asked Commander Xyloth about the incident. They were in a training facility, and Xyloth had been invited to speak about his experiences. The cadet wanted to know if the stories were true, if a human had really survived that much damage and kept fighting. Xyloth looked at the young cadet and saw his own past reflected there. Confident, cocky, certain that he understood how the universe worked. He smiled sadly and nodded. The stories are all true, every word. And if you remember nothing else from my lecture today, remember this: never underestimate a human. Never assume you have won just because you have hurt them, because pain only makes them angry, and anger makes them focus, and focus makes them unstoppable. The cadet laughed nervously, thinking it was exaggeration. Xyloth did not blame him. He had laughed too, once upon a time, before he learned the truth. Before he shot a human and watched him laugh and keep coming. Before he understood that some lessons can only be learned through experience, and some experiences change you forever. Daniel Chen went on to live a long and productive life. He never spoke publicly about what happened on that pirate ship. He did not need to. His actions had spoken loudly enough, echoing across the galaxy, carried on the lips of every pirate who had been there or heard the tale from someone who had. He became a symbol without trying, a reminder of what humanity represented. Not perfection, not invincibility, but persistence. The absolute, unwavering determination to keep moving forward no matter what obstacles appeared. To get back up when knocked down. To laugh in the face of pain and keep coming, one step at a time, until the goal was reached or there was nothing left to give. That was the true meaning of humanity. That was what made them special. And that was why Commander Xyloth, former pirate, retired cargo hauler, spent the rest of his days warning anyone who would listen. Never, ever make the mistake he made. Never push a human too far, because they will push back, and they will never stop pushing until they have won. The story of Daniel Chen became part of galactic folklore, told and retold in 1,000 different languages. Some versions exaggerated the details, adding impossible feats and heroic speeches. Others stripped it down to its bare essentials, but they all contained the same core truth. A human had been shot, had been wounded, had been hurt in ways that should have ended him, and he had laughed, and he had kept coming, unstoppable, relentless, inevitable. That was humanity. That was their gift and their curse. The inability to quit, encoded in their genes, refined by millions of years of evolution on a brutal planet that tested them constantly. They were survivors not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to accept any outcome other than survival. The galaxy learned that lesson the hard way, through incidents like Daniel Chen's, through wars and conflicts where humans, outnumbered and outgunned, had somehow found a way to win. Through countless small encounters where someone had underestimated a human and paid the price. Slowly, painfully, the other species came to understand what they were dealing with. A species that could not be stopped. A species that would not surrender. A species that, when pushed to their limits, simply pushed those limits further out and kept going. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It inspired awe and fear. It changed the balance of power in the galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple, undeniable fact of human persistence. And somewhere on Earth, in a small apartment filled with rocks and research notes, Daniel Chen slept peacefully. His body bore scars from that day, reminders of what he had endured, but his mind was at peace. He had done what needed to be done. He had shown the galaxy who humanity was, and that was enough. He could return to his research, his quiet life, his simple pleasures, but the galaxy would never forget. The pirates would never forget. Commander Xyloth would never forget. They had all learned the same lesson that day, a lesson written in plasma burns and blood, in footsteps that never stopped echoing through metal corridors, in a smile that promised consequences. Humanity was not to be trifled with, not because they would crush you with superior force, but because they would simply refuse to die, refuse to quit, refuse to give up until they had accomplished their goal. And that made them the most dangerous species in the universe. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest, but the most determined. And determination, as it turned out, was worth more than all the other qualities combined. The lesson spread through the galaxy like ripples on a pond. Ship after ship heard the story. Station after station passed along the warning. And slowly, subtly, the way other species looked at humans began to change. They were still friendly, still cooperative, still members of the Galactic Council in good standing, but there was a new element in how they were perceived. Respect. The kind of respect born from understanding what someone is truly capable of when pushed. Years became decades. Decades became generations. The story of Daniel Chen never quite faded into obscurity. New versions emerged, adapted for new audiences, translated into new languages, but the core remained the same. We shot a human. He laughed. He kept coming, and nothing we did could stop him. That was the legacy of that day. Not fear, exactly, though fear was part of it, but something deeper, an understanding that the universe contained mysteries science had not fully explained, that biology and physics could not account for everything, that sometimes will alone could trump reality itself. Humanity continued to expand through the stars, making alliances, building colonies, contributing to galactic culture and science. They were good neighbors, for the most part, helpful, creative, curious about the universe and their place in it. But everyone who dealt with them carried a tiny awareness in the back of their mind, a reminder of what could happen if things went wrong, a memory of stories like Daniel Chen's. And that awareness, that collective memory, helped keep the peace more effectively than any treaty or military force ever could. Because everyone knew, deep in their hearts, that starting a war with humanity was not just dangerous, it was futile. You could hurt them, yes. You could wound them, kill them, destroy their ships and their stations, but you could not break them. They would keep coming, always, forever, until they won or until there were no more humans left to fight. And given their numbers and their spread across the galaxy, the latter seemed almost impossible to achieve. So peace prevailed, not perfect peace, but the kind of peace that comes from mutual understanding and respect. The kind of peace that lasts because everyone involved knows the true cost of breaking it. The kind of peace that humanity, through incidents like Daniel Chen's, had earned not by being the strongest, but by being unbreakable. And in that peace, in that hard-won understanding between species, something beautiful emerged. Cooperation, friendship, the sharing of knowledge and culture. The building of something greater than any one species could achieve alone. A true galactic civilization, bound together not by force, but by choice. But underlying it all, remembered in quiet moments and dark nights, was the lesson that could not be unlearned. The lesson that Commander Xyloth had paid so dearly to understand. The lesson that every pirate, raider, and would-be aggressor carried with them. We shot a human. He laughed. He kept coming. And we learned that some things in this universe cannot be stopped, only survived. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not their technology, not their art, not their science, though all of those mattered, but their spirit, their unbreakable, unstoppable, relentless spirit that refused to accept defeat, no matter how certain it seemed. That spirit inspired others, showed them what was possible when you simply refused to quit. It changed the galaxy in ways large and small, obvious and subtle. And Daniel Chen, xenobiologist, survivor, unwitting symbol of human determination, continued his work among the stars. He studied rocks and minerals, cataloged alien flora, wrote papers that advanced scientific understanding. He lived a good life, a quiet life, the kind of life he had always wanted. But his legacy was something far greater than he ever intended. His legacy was a galaxy that understood, truly understood, what it meant to be human, to face impossible odds and laugh, to be knocked down and get back up, to be shot, wounded, broken, and still keep coming. To be unstoppable not because you are invincible, but because you simply refuse to accept any other outcome. That was humanity. That was their strength. And that was why on that distant day in that pirate ship's corridor, when Commander Xyloff shot Daniel Chen and watched him laugh and keep coming, the galaxy changed forever. Not in one dramatic moment, but in countless small shifts of perception, understanding, and respect. A change that would echo through centuries, shaping the future of every species that called the stars home. The lesson was simple, clear, and absolute. Humans could be hurt, but they could not be stopped. And that made all the difference.